Hi, everyone. Chris Fuentes here, the Chief Marketing Officer of OnScent, and I'm very happy to welcome you to the second episode of Tariffs in Motion. Today we have Rebecca Williams. She's with the Rockefeller Group and truly an expert in foreign trade zones. Rebecca, welcome. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. In a nutshell, explain what a trade zone is.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Excited to be here. Foreign trade zone is a physical location located in the United States where we're near a customs port of entry or within some distance of a customs port of entry. And the concept is to let importers who are using these foreign trade zones put off the customs entry and duty payment process until the goods have been brought to the foreign trade zone, what we call in bond, and stored there, or other business activities have been conducted on that inventory, and not until merchandise is going to be shipped out of the foreign trade zone for sale in the United States, or what we call entry into the U.S. commerce, will those duties and tariffs be payable. Really, the only activity that cannot be accommodated by law, there's a restriction in the law, is retail sale. Nearly every wholesale business activity can be accommodated.
It's been in 90 years since it started, so a lot has happened between those first 90 years and probably the next 9 months.
It was born in 1934 as part of President Roosevelt's New Deal legislation. So in 1930, we had Congress pass the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which was a law that basically imposed very high tariffs on imported goods coming to the country. This was kind of a direct response to World War I and taking a protectionist approach to trade policy in the United States. And there's a lot of economists and others who would basically point to that law and the imposition of those tariffs as being one of the main drivers of, the Great Depression. And so here comes 1934. New Deal legislation introduced by the Roosevelt administration, and this program was born from that. And the idea was to encourage and expedite from the mid-30s our U.S. participation in international trade, promote the importation of goods, both for export abroad as well as for combining with U.S. goods before sale, and giving those importers, those businesses in the United States, the opportunity to put off that customs duty or tariff payment process until a later point. 90 years later, we are in the same trade policy posture that we were in the mid-30s. We are now taking a more protectionist approach.
Interesting. I mean, this is not a small program. So take us through how big this program is today in the United States.
Yeah, the program is quite large. Total imports of goods in 23 was $3.1 trillion. $949 billion worth of merchandise was received into foreign trade zones in 2023. And that merchandise represents both domestic merchandise, or domestic status merchandise, we call it, as well as foreign status or bonded merchandise. And then of that $949 billion, $303 billion was foreign status or bonded merchandise, meaning imported merchandise moved to the foreign trade zone for receipt there without having the duties and tariffs having been paid. And so that $303 billion represents, almost 10% of total U.S. goods imports in 2023. That is a really big figure, and it shows how important the program is as an economic development tool, and a driver of economic activity and employment and investment here in the United States based on those companies.
What's the advantage of building an FTZ? Why would companies want to do it?
In general, there's two types of entities that can pursue kind of the establishment of a foreign trade zone, either an importer or we see third-party logistics providers. Both of those types of entities would pursue FTZ implementation. It is basically bucketed into three concepts. One is kind of customs duty and tariff mitigation strategies, which is what we see most companies, now in the past few months pursuing the program for. The idea, as I mentioned, is you can put off that customs entry and tariff payment process until the goods are going to be dispositioned out of the foreign trade zone site. In addition to cash flow, there's also these really coveted opportunities to eliminate customs duties and tariffs for merchandise that will be brought into the foreign trade zone and then subsequently exported to another country, or be determined to be scrap that can then be destroyed in the foreign trade zone to the point of no commercial value. Another bucket, the second bucket, is some state and local ad valorem inventory tax or other state level benefits that accrue to FTZ users. And then the third bucket, you see number 5 here, is kind of supply chain benefits or logistics administrative savings opportunities that flow to FTZ users.
The game is changing though, right? Help us understand that and take us through what the opportunities are around cash flow.
We've had what we often refer to as trade remedy tariffs since 2018, tariffs imposed to try to induce or compel U.S. importers to find other sources of supply and make goods here in the United States. Remedy tariffs under 301 against Chinese origin goods, remedy tariffs under 232, the section of the law against steel and aluminum derivatives. And so since that time, those tariffs all remained. And now we have an actually, more strenuous trade policy program since January of this year, wherein there are many tariffs on many goods being imported from all over the world. We do see kind of the government saying, we see you, FTZ program, and yes, you can still operate companies in an FTZ and you can still receive benefit, but there are going to be some restrictions. We can still import those goods into a U.S. foreign trade zone. And so we get to put off that tariff payment process that is generating this cash flow benefit. So that benefit still exists, as well as this idea that you can kind of extend that deferral or that cash flow benefit through supply chains here in the United States until the goods are sent to that last FTZ site and ultimately sold into the US from that site. Another very coveted benefit besides the cash flow is this opportunity to eliminate the duties and tariffs altogether. And this really, the program is kind of the sweet spot for that. There's not a lot of other ways you're going to achieve this benefit, other than if you pay the tariffs up front, export the goods, and then file what's called a customs drawback claim. That is a great program, but in the FTZ, you never pay the tariffs up front. And so essentially, you get to put the merchandise in the foreign trade zone, and for whatever portion of that merchandise, if you export in bond to your export destinations, you can completely obviate the U.S. tariff and duty payment obligation altogether. Scrap and waste is similar. A lot of companies have some small margin of scrap waste factor, 2%, 3%, whether the goods are obsolete, unsaleable, damaged, unusable, maybe expired. And in a normal customs duty rate environment, that might not generate a very big benefit. But when you apply stacked tariffs on top of that inventory that's going to be scrap, there's the opportunity to pursue a process with customs to destroy the merchandise to the point of no commercial value and then eliminate the tariffs associated with that destroyed inventory altogether. So these benefits continue to exist in the program, and they're only greater now that we have, higher tariffs associated with imported goods.
Thank you for that excellent explanation. One of the things that are going away is something called inverted tariffs. Tell us a little bit about inverted tariffs. It's a good subject for our listeners to understand.
For many industries, the parts and components and raw materials needed to make a good in the United States maintain higher duty rates than the finished good does itself if you were to import it. And that's a manufacturing disincentive. So this inverted tariff benefit was meant to correct that irrational treatment. But what it did is it allowed companies to essentially apply the finished good duty rate for what they were making in the foreign trade zone to the value of the imported parts and components that they brought into the foreign trade zone and consumed in the production process. You are now compelled through this legal status, privileged foreign status, to pay the duty and tariff rate associated with those parts and components that were incorporated into the finished good when they were brought into the zone. So effectively, for now, at least, the government has removed the inverted tariff benefit for most manufacturers, resulting in a totally different kind of FTZ environment for companies that are manufacturing.
What type of companies, Rebecca, do you recommend use FTZ opportunities and benefits?
It might really come down to is the cash flow benefit worth it for us? Do we need to keep that money in our pocket, or are we exporting our productions? It really just depends on import volumes, duty rates, how quickly people turn their inventory, and then whether or not they're conducting export activity that, is creating the new matrix of benefits.
Thank you. Really outstanding. I knew we would learn a lot, and I'm encouraged that somebody understands all of this, at least for the time being. So well done. Thanks for being with us.